My name is Emma Davis. I'm Haimuichin years old, and the house my grandmother left me, valued at Chintram Tamui, was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe, feel safe, start my life on my own terms. Instead, it became the stage for the most painful betrayal I have ever experienced. I always believed home was where love lived, where family gathered around shared memories, meals, laughter. I thought I knew what family meant. I thought I understood loyalty. I thought I mattered. But what I overheard that afternoon changed everything I ever believed. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in June. I had just returned from a busy morning showing properties as part of my work in real estate. My career was thriving. I had built something for myself, on my own, through grit and sacrifice. I remember standing in the kitchen, noting that the faucet had started to leak again. It had been acting up for a while, and I figured I should call my father, Robert, since he was the one who installed it last year. One of the few home improvements he actually did with his own hands. I dialed his international number. He and my mom, Diana, were in Europe on a 3-month vacation. A trip I had mostly funded. A trip they'd always dreamed of, and one I helped make possible out of love. Or so I thought. When he answered, his voice was distant, the signal lagging slightly. "Hello?" he said. "Hi, Dad," I responded. "Just a quick question about the kitchen faucet. Do you remember where you left the warranty papers? It started leaking again." He sighed into the phone, clearly annoyed. "They're in the file cabinet, second drawer under the kitchen counter. Why don't you just wait until we get back?" I explained calmly that the water was already damaging the cabinet below, and I just needed to check if the part was still under warranty. Okay, he muttered. "Your mother and I are just heading out to dinner near the Eiffel Tower." I smiled thinly. "Sounds lovely. How's Paris?" "Expensive," he replied flatly. "Look, I have to go. We'll talk later." "All right," I said. "Thanks. Enjoy dinner." I was about to end the call when I realized something. He hadn't actually hung up. And then I heard it. The soft rustle of movement, as though he was slipping the phone into his pocket. I knew I should hang up. I knew it was wrong to listen further. But something stopped me. Something, maybe intuition or fear, or just exhaustion from years of being ignored, held my finger above the red button. And then her voice came through. My mother's. "Who was that?" she asked. "Just Emma, complaining about something again," my father replied casually. "Something about the sink." My mother scoffed. "I don't know why your mother ever gave her that house. It should have been ours from the start." And then, as if someone had pulled the floor from under me, I heard my father say the words that would echo in my head for weeks to come. "She's always been a burden." I stopped breathing. A burden. After everything I'd done. After all the sacrifices, the work, the obedience, the hope for their approval, they saw me as a burden. I kept listening. Frozen. Numb. "We really need to have that conversation when we get back," my father continued. "She needs to understand that the house is our retirement security. We can't keep letting her treat it like it's hers." "It's not like she earned it," my mother chimed in. "It was just handed to her." "She's so easy to manipulate," my dad said. "Remember how quickly she agreed to pay for most of this trip? I just had to bring up family obligations." They both laughed. That same synchronized laugh I'd heard all my life. But now it sounded sinister. "We just have to keep playing along," my father continued. "Eventually she'll sign the deed over, or at least add our names to it." "What if she doesn't?" my mom asked. "She will," my father said, with confidence that chilled me. "She's desperate for our approval. We just have to guilt her enough. If that doesn't work, start talking about nursing homes, medical costs. Trust me, by this time next year, that house will be ours." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone. I wanted to unhear every word. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed completely still. Motionless, heart racing, eyes wet. My mind spiraled through every memory. My father scolding me for wasting money on college, even though he never contributed a cent. My mother scoffing at my choice to become a broker. The way they moved into my home, took over the kitchen decisions, insulted my design choices, all while insisting they were helping. I thought they loved me, but in that moment I realized they didn't see me. Not really. Not as a woman, not as a daughter, not as a human. I was an asset, a resource, a wallet with a heartbeat, and all I ever wanted was to be enough. When the call finally disconnected on its own after about 15 more minutes of planning my manipulation, I remained seated in that kitchen, the dripping faucet now barely audible over the thunder in my ears. Everything I believed about family began to unravel. The house wasn't just walls and windows anymore. It was a symbol, a battleground, a line drawn in the sand. That house had been the one place I thought I could claim as mine. It was where my grandmother taught me how to bake cookies, how to name the flowers in the garden, how to believe in myself. And now it was the thing they were planning to use against me. I stood up slowly, tears streaming down my face, and I made a decision. If I was a burden, then it was time to relieve them of that weight, permanently. No more begging for kindness, no more buying their love, no more pretending. That night, I began to build my plan, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. For the first time, I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like a survivor. I wasn't born into comfort, and certainly not into approval. Growing up, money was always tight. My parents, Robert and Diana, were the kind of people who kept tally of everything, especially the things they gave. My father worked in a factory and carried with him a constant cloud of disappointment over the life he felt he'd been denied. My mother worked part-time as a receptionist, often coming home exhausted and resentful. Every dollar spent on me came with a heavy reminder. That's money we can't spend on ourselves. I was never allowed to forget the cost of my existence. Even when I was a child, love felt conditional, something I had to earn by behaving perfectly, excelling at school, and never asking for too much. They never said "I love you" without a sigh attached. Warmth was a reward, not a right. But weekends were different. On weekends, I was with Grandma Elizabeth. Her house sat like a sunbeam on the corner of Magnolia Drive, a graceful colonial wrapped in white shutters and rose-colored brick, with a garden that bloomed as if the earth loved her more than anyone else. I remember stepping through the wooden gate each Saturday morning and feeling something unnameable shift in my chest. Relief, maybe. Possibility. Safety. Unlike my parents, Grandma never made me feel like an inconvenience. She saw me. She asked questions and listened to my answers. She wasn't flashy, not the kind of grandmother who bought expensive gifts or tried to bribe affection with toys. Her love came in gestures, the warm cinnamon rolls she made from scratch, the way she tucked my hair behind my ear when I read out loud, the way she knelt beside me in the dirt as we planted lilies and lavender, her fingers always gentle, her patience infinite. She once said something to me as we sipped lemonade on the back porch. I couldn't have been more than 9. "Emma," she said, "don't ever let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide that for yourself." At the time, I didn't fully understand, but I never forgot it. Those words sat in the back of my mind like a quiet lantern, ready to light up when the world got dark. Unlike my parents, who only saw limitations of money, of time, of hope, Grandma saw potential. She believed in my mind, in my dreams, in my stubbornness, even when others saw it as a flaw. When I turned 18 and told my parents I wanted to go to college, their response was sharp and final. "College is for people who think they're better than everyone else," my dad snapped. "You think you're better than us?" My mom shook her head and said, "You want it? You pay for it." And so I did. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I worked 3 jobs. I lived in tiny apartments with too many roommates. I bought used textbooks and rode the bus and learned to survive on rice and frozen vegetables. But I did it. Grandma was there for all of it. She helped me write essays. She sent me care packages. She showed up at my graduation, dressed in a teal suit, her smile brighter than the sun that day. "You did it," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "You did it, and I always knew you would." My parents? They complained about the parking. After college, I got a job with a boutique real estate firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I poured everything I had into it, my time, my energy, my weekends. Within 2 years, I was closing deals. Within 4, I was making a 6-figure income. I bought my own clothes, my own car, my own furniture. I sent my parents money every few months, even though they never asked. I thought maybe if I was generous enough, good enough, successful enough, they'd finally look at me and say, "We're proud of you." But the words never came. Then, when I was Haimui Lum, the call came. Grandma had passed away. A heart attack, sudden and silent. It was like someone took a wrecking ball to my foundation. I'd lost the one person who made me feel like I mattered. At the reading of her will, I sat silently while her lawyer, a kind-eyed man named Lewis, read her wishes aloud. To my granddaughter, Emma Davis, I leave the home at Motngin Tam Trum Bon Mui Hai Magnolia Drive. She has shown the strength and responsibility to appreciate its worth. I stared at the words on paper, my vision blurring. The house, the garden, the memories. She left it all to me. She trusted me. My parents' faces darkened. There was no hiding their disappointment. They had assumed the house would be theirs, that it was their right as her son and daughter-in-law. But Grandma had seen through them, just as I was starting to. They were left a modest inheritance. Within weeks, they spent it on a new car and a flat-screen TV. Meanwhile, I moved into the house she'd given me, not just out of sentiment, but out of reverence. I cared for it. I paid the taxes. I updated the plumbing, repainted the walls. Every nail I hammered felt like honoring her memory. And then, they moved in. At first, it was meant to be temporary, just until my father's job situation stabilized, just while they figured things out. I didn't question it. I still wanted to believe in the idea of family. I wanted to be good. So I let them in. They never left. And slowly, piece by piece, they took over. My dad's recliner appeared in the living room, replacing the armchair Grandma and I used to share. My mom swapped out my wall art for her decorative plates. The pinks and creams I had chosen for the guest room were painted over in sterile grays. They started calling it our home. They made renovation plans without consulting me. They mocked my design choices. They rolled their eyes when I tried to set boundaries. Families don't have boundaries, they'd say. But somehow, the lack of boundaries only ever served them. I kept paying the mortgage. I paid the electric, the repairs, the insurance, and still, they treated me like a guest in my own house. No matter how successful I became, no matter how much I provided, they made sure I knew I wasn't enough. I was just a placeholder, a steward, a transitional owner until they could reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. But what they didn't know was that every flower in the garden, every tile in the kitchen, every corner of that house whispered to me in my grandmother's voice, "Don't let them tell you what you're worth." The moment I ended that accidental phone call, everything inside me began to change. I didn't cry, not at first. I sat in silence, the phone still warm in my hand, the word burden echoing like a bell inside my skull. The betrayal felt too large to process all at once. It wasn't just what they said, it was that they had always felt that way. Every hug, every thank you, every time they said they loved me, how much of it was real, how much of it was just performance to keep me giving, to keep me pliable. I had lived so long trying to earn their approval that I didn't realize they never planned to give it. They only knew how to take, and I had let them. But not anymore. The next morning, I took a sick day. 3, in fact. I didn't have the strength to smile at clients or pretend nothing had changed, because everything had. I couldn't focus on selling homes to others when I wasn't even safe in my own. I needed to think, not emotionally, but clearly. Grandma wouldn't want me to act out of spite. She taught me to move with grace, with precision, with wisdom. So I took a deep breath and did what she would have done. I made a plan. First, I called a lawyer. Patricia Winters, someone I'd worked with on closings before, a sharp, no-nonsense family law attorney. I laid out the facts. The house was solely in my name. I had maintained it, paid all expenses. My parents had no legal claim. She was calm, reassuring, and firm. "You have every right to do with the property as you see fit," she told me. "They may be your parents, but they are not your landlords. You owe them nothing, not your home, not your future." I felt a wave of relief, a clarity that helped slice through the fog of guilt and confusion. She advised me to document everything, give reasonable notice if I moved their belongings, and above all, protect myself. Then I called Marcus Wilson, a colleague from work, one of the best brokers I knew, known for fast, discreet property sales. "I need to sell my house," I told him over coffee. Quietly, no signs, no open houses, and quickly, within 6 weeks. He raised an eyebrow. "Running from the law, Emma?" He joked, then saw my face and knew not to press. "All right," he said, his voice serious. "I have a few pre-qualified buyers looking in your neighborhood. We can line up private showings starting next week." The house, thanks to rising values in the area, could sell for close to Chin Tram Tam Mui. I was willing to settle for less, just to close quickly. He estimated Chin Tram if we moved fast. That was enough. I wasn't looking to win. I was looking to break free. I went home that night and opened my laptop, creating a detailed spreadsheet. I listed every item in the house, dividing them into categories: mine, inherited from grandma, theirs, and questionable. If I couldn't clearly prove something was mine or hers, I put it in the parent column. I didn't want legal or moral ambiguity to haunt me later. I wasn't going to stoop to their level. I rented a short-term, furnished apartment 2 hours away and opened a new bank account at a bank my parents didn't use. I bought a new phone, a new email, a new mailbox. I contacted a moving company and booked 2 trucks, one for my belongings, one for theirs. And then, I found the letter. It was buried in a box of my grandmother's papers I'd saved but never fully gone through. Written in her flowing, elegant handwriting, dated just a month before she passed. "My sweet Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I've gone, and I hope this letter finds you strong. I want you to know why I left you the house and not your parents. I watched them for years spend recklessly, blame others, and expect handouts. But you, my Emma, you have worked for every single thing. You have dignity and fire and a heart that sees the world with compassion, not resentment. I trust you. I see in you the woman I always hoped to be. Please don't ever doubt that you deserve what's been given to you. Use it well. Build your life. Protect yourself. And don't be afraid to choose peace, even if that means choosing distance." I cried then, deep, guttural sobs that rose from the place where grief meets truth. Her voice reached me across time, pulling me up from the despair and reminding me that I wasn't wrong. I wasn't cruel. I was simply protecting what was mine, from people who had never done the same for me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I scheduled showings, cleaned every surface, packed boxes, stored my parents' items in a paid facility under their name, 6 months, prepaid. I didn't want to leave them homeless, but I wasn't going to let them hijack my life either. Marcus found a buyer by week 3, a tech executive relocating with his wife. They loved the house, loved the neighborhood, made an offer. Chin Tram Moi Lam. I accepted. I stood in the kitchen on closing day, staring at the granite countertops my mother once criticized for being too pink. I left a note on them. Surprise. A burden did this. I locked the door one last time and dropped the key through the mail slot. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I drove to my new apartment with a trunk full of carefully packed memories and a chest full of clarity. For days after, I waited for the storm. When my parents returned from Europe and found their keys didn't work, the messages started. Voicemails filled with confusion, then anger, then faux concern. "What have you done, Emma?" "We just want to talk. You had no right." They showed up at my office, caused a scene, accused me of betrayal. My boss asked me if I needed support. "Family issues," I said, and she nodded with understanding. "Take the time you need," she replied. Even she knew, sometimes family is just another word for danger wrapped in guilt. I didn't answer their messages. I didn't explain. I had nothing left to give them. They had spent years draining me, of money, of confidence, of peace, but not anymore. They didn't stop. I hadn't even finished unpacking the last of my boxes at the temporary apartment before my phone, my old number, was lighting up non-stop. Missed calls, voicemails, emails with subject lines in all caps. "Emma, please respond." "What happened to the house?" "Call us now." But I didn't open a single one. I had already changed my number, my bank, my locks, my mailing address. I had created a clean break, but they were clawing at every wall I built, like desperate hands scraping glass. I let the messages pile up like snow outside a door I refused to open. For days, I kept expecting the guilt to come crashing down like it always used to. That sick twist in my stomach. That childlike hope that maybe I had misunderstood, that maybe they didn't mean it. But this time was different. I had the truth in their own voices, still saved on my recorder. I had their laughter, their words, their entitlement. And not once did they sound like parents mourning a relationship. They sounded like thieves caught mid-theft. A week after their return, the messages escalated from pleading to rage. "We came back and the locks were changed," my father growled in one voicemail. "This isn't over. You think this is legal? We'll see about that." Another message arrived from my mother, her voice soaked in crocodile tears. "Emma, darling, we're worried sick. We don't understand. We just want to talk. Please don't shut us out. You're scaring us." Scaring them? After what they'd said? After what they'd planned? I didn't reply. I stayed silent. I didn't want war, but I wasn't going to surrender either. For the first time, I wasn't playing the role they had written for me. Then came the final voicemail, the one that cracked something open. It was near midnight when it landed, cold and cruel. "We found your little note," my father hissed. "You've made a terrible mistake. That was our home. You had no right. We're speaking to a lawyer in the morning. If you think you can just erase us from your life, think again." I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring at the walls of my small apartment. No paintings yet, no color, just silence and shadows. The letter from my grandmother was still tucked into the drawer of my nightstand. I pulled it out and read it again. "Please don't ever doubt that you deserve what's been given to you." I whispered her words aloud like a prayer. And still, my hands trembled. The next morning, I received a text from a coworker. "Hey, Emma. Your parents came by the office, made a bit of a scene, said something about a stolen property." I felt the blood drain from my face. I called my boss immediately to explain. I didn't give the full story, just enough. "My parents are angry about a personal estate decision. The house was left to me by my grandmother. They lived there rent-free for years and now they're upset I sold it." There was a pause on the line, then her quiet response. "They're not welcome here anymore. You let me know if they come back." And just like that, one of the fears I had held tightly in my chest, losing professional credibility, began to dissolve. Still, they wouldn't quit. 2 weeks later, they somehow got my new email, likely from a distant relative or a naive neighbor, and sent a long message filled with self-pity and revisionist history. "You misunderstood what we said. You overreacted. You betrayed us after all we've done for you." But then came the kicker, the same manipulation dressed in a new costume. "We're willing to forgive you. Let's use the money from the house to buy a new property we can all live in together." I stared at the screen, disbelief rising like bile. They still believed they were entitled. They still believed they could guilt me back under control. There was no apology, no reflection, no accountability. Just more control disguised as compromise. I forwarded the email to Patricia, my lawyer. She replied within minutes. Emma, you are under no obligation to respond. Legally, you've done nothing wrong. This is classic emotional coercion. Stay firm. I did. I blocked the new email. I poured myself a cup of coffee, and I let it burn a little on the way down, just enough to feel my own strength again. Then, it happened. The confrontation I'd been dreading. A former neighbor, Rachel, called one afternoon. Emma, she said gently, I thought you should know. Your parents are back. They're parked outside the old house, just sitting in their car, watching. My heart thudded once in my chest, then again, faster. The new owners were out of town, and I didn't want them coming back to find two strangers claiming squatters' rights on their lawn. I called Richard, the man who bought the house. He was grateful for the heads up and promised to notify the security patrol immediately. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then I picked up. Emma, my father's voice said, controlled, cold. We need to talk. Meet us at the cafe on Maple Street tomorrow morning at Moy. If you don't show, we'll come to your work again. And this time, we won't leave quietly. He hung up. I could have ignored it. I could have gone to court for a restraining order. But I was tired of running. Tired of hiding from the confrontation I knew was inevitable. I told Patricia. She offered to go with me. I said no. This was something I had to face alone. The next morning, I walked into the cafe 15 minutes late on purpose. I wanted them to sweat. They sat in the far corner, my mother overdressed in pearls and lipstick, my father in his old leather jacket, arms folded. Their eyes snapped to me when I entered. I wore my best blazer, my heels clicking confidently against the tile. I sat down, placed my phone on the table, screen up, recording. Emma, my mother began, is that really necessary? I didn't answer. I looked directly at them. Let's be clear. You threatened my workplace. That's coercion. I'm here because I'm giving you one last chance to speak truthfully. My father leaned forward. You stole our house. No, I said. I sold the home that was legally and solely mine, the one your mother left to me, the one you tried to manipulate me out of. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't flinch. I was beyond their reach now. I heard everything, I continued. The call, the plans, calling me a burden, laughing about how easily you could guilt me. I have the recording. My mother paled. My father's mouth opened, then shut. You recorded us illegally, he began. Actually, I said calmly, not illegal. You called me. You forgot to hang up. I was still part of that conversation. And what I heard? It ended everything. My mother began to cry, tears she could summon like clockwork. We didn't mean it. We were tired, overwhelmed. You were in Paris, I said quietly, on a vacation I paid for. I stood up. This is the last conversation we will ever have, unless it's through lawyers. I have nothing left for you, not money, not access, not forgiveness. I'm done being your daughter when you were never truly my parents. It didn't happen overnight, this healing, this becoming. For a while after that confrontation at the cafe, I moved through the world as if I had no skin, raw, overexposed. There were mornings I would wake up in the middle of my new apartment and forget where I was. I'd reach instinctively for the house key that no longer existed and feel a hollow ache in my chest where home used to be. Not because I missed the house. I missed what I thought it meant. I missed the dream of family. The fantasy that if I just worked hard enough, loved enough, gave enough, they would one day love me back in the way I needed. That fantasy was now gone, burned away like mist under sunlight. But even as the grief clung to me like smoke, something else began to take its place. Freedom. It didn't announce itself with trumpets. It came quietly. In the ability to sit with silence and not dread the next blow. in drinking coffee on my tiny balcony without the tension of walking on eggshells, in not having to justify my choices to people who had only ever weaponized my generosity. Every day I woke up and made choices for myself, by myself, and every day that didn't end in panic felt like a small victory. I kept going to therapy. Dr. Palmer became a guide through the tangled roots of my childhood, helping me separate the voices of my parents from the truth of who I was. She called it financial abuse, what they'd done, using love as leverage, guilt as currency. She taught me that survival sometimes means walking away, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. That self-respect isn't selfishness, that boundaries aren't betrayal. At first, even those words felt foreign in my mouth. I had spent so long equating obedience with love, sacrifice with virtue. But now I was learning something new. Peace is earned in hard choices, not in passive suffering. And I had made the hardest one of all. I had chosen me. Work became my anchor. Real estate, for all its stress and uncertainty, gave me a sense of purpose. I threw myself into it, not to escape, but to reclaim. With every client I helped, especially young women buying their first homes, I felt a flicker of meaning return to my life. I saw the same hope in their eyes that I used to carry. And now, I could help them protect it. I began to notice patterns. So many of them had stories of pressure from family, partners, even so-called friends, pushing them toward decisions that didn't feel right. My dad says it's a waste of money. My boyfriend wants his name on the deed even though he's not paying. My mom says I shouldn't buy without asking her first. I started giving different kinds of advice, beyond interest rates and inspections. I told them, "Your home is your autonomy. Don't let anyone else claim it unless they've earned that trust." Their eyes would widen, sometimes misting over. No one had ever told them that before. The more I shared, the more I felt a calling rise in me, soft at first, then louder with every passing week. I remembered what my grandmother wrote in her final letter: "Use it well, build your life, protect yourself." What if I could help others do the same? What if the pain I had endured could serve as a lighthouse for someone else in the fog? I pitched the idea to my boss, Vanessa, a workshop series for first-time buyers, especially women, focused on financial autonomy and recognizing manipulation in money matters. "We'll call it something simple but strong," I told her. "Foundations, because a home should be built on more than concrete and wood. It should be built on knowledge, clarity, and consent." She loved the idea. We launched the first workshop 2 months later. I expected maybe a dozen people. Over 30 showed up. The room was filled with stories like mine, some spoken, some silently nodded to. A woman in her 50s whose grown son wanted her to co-sign on his third condo. A 20-something nurse whose boyfriend insisted she split the down payment even though she'd saved every penny herself. A divorced mother of 2 trying to protect her equity from a manipulative ex. I told them my story, not all of it, just enough to make the room feel safe. I watched their posture change. I watched their eyes flicker with recognition. And I knew. This was where my pain became purpose. This was where I rebuilt. 6 months after selling the house, I used part of the money to buy my own home. A modest townhome in Richmond, just far enough from where I'd grown up to feel like a new beginning. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every pillow, every piece of art, every lamp was chosen by me. For me. No one criticized the color scheme. No one questioned the budget. No one replaced my books with crystal figurines or demanded their recliner sit dead center in the living room. The silence of my new home wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It hummed with autonomy. I changed the way I interacted with family too, or rather, I didn't interact at all. The emails from my parents slowed after I made it clear I would only communicate through legal counsel. They never tried to show real remorse. Only arguments, justifications, and half-hearted attempts to regain access. I no longer felt the need to reply. I stopped checking for messages. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped apologizing. Some nights I would find old photographs tucked in boxes I hadn't yet unpacked, me on my dad's shoulders at a carnival, my mom braiding my hair before a school recital. I used to cling to those as proof that they loved me once. Now I understood something deeper. They may have loved the version of me that obeyed, that needed, that didn't threaten their ego. But they never truly loved the woman I had become, the woman who said no. That was okay. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as reconciliation. You can wish someone healing without inviting them back into your life. You can grieve who they were without ignoring who they are. I didn't need revenge. I needed distance, and now I had it. 1 year after the sale of my grandmother's house, I drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of her favorite roses. I sat by her headstone, placed the flowers gently down and whispered, "I understand now. Thank you." The wind stirred the leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt home, not in a building, not in a person, but in myself. Some stories end with escape, others begin there. After everything, after the confrontation, the silence, the healing, I found myself not simply free of my past, but standing at the threshold of something far more meaningful, ownership of my future, not just of property or a new home, but of my voice, my identity, my direction. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't reacting. I was creating. And the more I leaned into that, the more I began to realize that the very wound that nearly broke me had become the wellspring of my strength. Pain is rarely something we would choose, but sometimes it becomes the one thing that shows us who we truly are when all the roles we were forced to play are stripped away. That first year after reclaiming my life, I poured myself into the Foundations Workshop program. What started as a modest seminar about financial empowerment for first-time homebuyers grew into something deeper, something alive. Women came from all walks of life: young professionals, divorced mothers, retirees, even high school graduates determined to break cycles their families had never questioned. I didn't set out to be anyone's guide, but I found that telling my story out loud, without shame, without apologies, was like giving others permission to do the same. One woman, a nurse in her late 20s, pulled me aside after a session with tears in her eyes. "I thought I was crazy," she whispered, "for not wanting to add my fiancé to the deed. He called me selfish, said I didn't trust him. But listening to you, I realized I've been bullied into calling exploitation love." Moments like that stitched something back together inside me that I hadn't even realized was still broken. Not every woman had a story like mine, but nearly every woman had a story of being diminished, dismissed, made to feel small in rooms they had built, in lives they had worked hard to afford. I created new modules that went beyond financial literacy into boundary setting, estate planning, financial abuse identification, legal protections, and emotional resilience. We held role-play sessions, Q&As with lawyers and therapists, and built a peer network where women could support each other without judgment. One evening, after the third session in a series, a woman asked, "Why do you do this, Emma? You've already rebuilt your life. Why keep reliving the pain?" The answer rose from my chest before I could filter it. Because it means something now. Because every time I help someone else stand a little taller, my story becomes less about what they did to me and more about what I chose to do with it. That same month, a journalist from a local women's publication attended one of our sessions and asked to write a feature. The article titled "Financial Freedom: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into Empowerment" brought a flood of attention. Some of it uncomfortable. My inbox was suddenly full of messages from people I didn't know, strangers thanking me for speaking out, others sharing their own heartbreaks, many asking for help. I didn't have all the answers, but I began collecting resources. Lists of pro bono attorneys, financial counselors, domestic abuse shelters that specialized in coercive control. I began collaborating with social workers, building a toolkit that anyone, anywhere, could download and use to take the first step toward reclaiming their autonomy. That spotlight also brought someone unexpected back into my life. Judith, my grandmother's sister. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, and I honestly didn't expect we ever would. But after reading the article, she reached out. We met for lunch in a quiet cafe, and the moment I saw her, something inside me softened. She looked like my grandmother, not just in the way her hands folded around her teacup, but in the way her eyes held stories with grace. "Emma," she said gently, "Elizabeth would be so proud of you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She told me about things I never knew, how my father had always expected to inherit, how he had leaned on Grandma financially for years. "Your grandmother loved him, but she saw through him," Judith said. "She always knew he felt entitled, but you never asked. You just earned. That's why she chose you." We talked for hours, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to defend my decisions to someone older. I didn't feel like a child seeking approval. I felt like a woman among women, part of a lineage that was far more than blood. It was values, resilience, integrity. When we hugged goodbye, I felt something like legacy pass between us, not a house or an heirloom, but a sense of permission to carry forward what had once been taken. Not everyone was supportive, of course. I still occasionally heard whispers from extended family, accusations, half-truths, assumptions based on pieces of the story twisted into something easier to digest than the truth. She threw her parents out. She sold the family home. She turned her back. I didn't respond to those voices anymore. They weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to their own discomfort. People will always try to villainize those who refuse to be used. That's not my burden to carry. What I carry now is purpose. Every time I see a woman walk into a session with uncertainty and walk out with clarity, I know it. Every time someone emails to say, "Because of what you shared, I finally set a boundary," I feel it. Every time I sit in my own living room, surrounded by furniture I chose, books I love, and silence I earned, I remind myself, this is what healing looks like. It's not just peace, it's power. Not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that says, "I know who I am, and I will never again let someone else define my worth." My parents no longer contact me. At some point, even manipulators run out of energy when their control fails. Maybe they're still angry. Maybe they've rewritten the story in their own minds. Maybe they've convinced themselves that I was always ungrateful, cold, unloving. It doesn't matter anymore. I've learned that peace isn't found in changing someone else's narrative. It's found in walking away from the need to participate in it. Today, I stand with women who are ready to write new endings, and I do it not despite what I went through, but because of it. Because once, I believed love meant sacrifice, and now I know it means safety. Because once, I believed family was forever, and now I know that love, real love, is built, not inherited. Because once, I believed being a daughter meant being silent, and now I speak, loudly, clearly, and always for myself. Some endings don't come with fireworks or fanfare. They arrive gently, like the last page of a well-read book, unexpectedly quiet, deeply final, and somehow peaceful. A year after I closed the door on my old life, on the house, on my parents, on the illusion of family I had chased for decades, I found myself waking up one spring morning in my new townhome, sunlight curling across the sheets, and I realized I felt something I hadn't known in years. Safe. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I lay still for a moment, listening. There was no tension in the air, no unspoken expectations hanging like fog in the hallway, no footsteps I had to anticipate, no voice ready to cut me down. There was only stillness and birdsong and my own breath. And then, joy. Not loud, not euphoric, but steady, like a heartbeat. It came in the morning coffee I brewed just the way I liked it, with too much cinnamon and a splash of oat milk. It came in the stack of library books on my nightstand, in the walks I took around the lake with no one asking where I'd been, in the laughter that began showing up again in my phone calls with friends who saw me. Not the version of me I had to perform, but the version I had fought to become. It came in the freedom to choose silence without guilt, to decorate my home with soft pinks and golds without criticism, to live without the looming shadow of someone else's disappointment. There was no single day when I declared myself healed. Healing is not a summit. It's a quiet series of choices, reaching for peace instead of chaos, truth instead of illusion, courage instead of comfort. There were still moments that ached. Sometimes I'd see a father and daughter walking together, laughing easily, and I'd feel the old stab of longing. Not for my father exactly, but for the version of him I used to imagine, the one I thought might show up if I just did enough. That ache doesn't go away entirely, but over time, it softens. I learned to sit with it without letting it consume me, to honor the longing without letting it rewrite history. I kept building. Not just my business, which had grown into something steady and respected, but my life. I joined a local community garden and found unexpected peace in the rhythm of dirt under my nails, seedlings becoming something tender and alive. I adopted a rescue dog, a scrappy little terrier mix named Clover, who had been overlooked by several families. When I knelt beside her cage, she placed her paw on my knee like she knew something about being unwanted, about second chances. We brought each other home. Friendship took root again, too, in the places where I had once allowed shame and secrecy to build walls. Megan, the wild college friend my parents had disapproved of, became one of my closest companions. She didn't ask me to explain the past. She simply showed up, week after week, for movie nights, hikes, and spontaneous road trips. Through her, I reconnected with a few other women I had lost touch with, and together we formed a kind of chosen family. We had different stories, but we all understood what it meant to start over, to love ourselves enough to walk away from what hurt, even when it wore the mask of love. And love, yes, even that began to take shape again, slowly and on my terms. It came not in a grand romantic whirlwind, but in moments of kindness, mutual respect, shared values. It came in a man who didn't flinch at my boundaries, who didn't try to fix me, who didn't expect me to perform my worth. He simply listened, showed up, asked what I needed. And when I told him about my past, about the fire I'd walked through to stand where I was, he didn't try to make it small or neat. He said, "That must have been so heavy. I'm glad you put it down." Maybe that's what love truly is. Not someone trying to carry your past for you, but someone who stands beside you as you learn to carry your present with pride. 1 year to the day after I sold my grandmother's house, I returned to her grave. This time, not with grief tightening my throat, but with gratitude in my chest. I brought her roses, her favorite, and sat by her marker in the warm breeze. "You were right," I whispered. "I did need to protect myself, and I did use it well. Your gift, it saved me. Not because of its price, because of its message. You saw me. You believed in me, when no one else did." I closed my eyes and let the wind carry that truth into the air. I didn't feel alone. I felt held, by memory, by legacy, by choice. I don't know if my parents ever truly understood what they lost. I don't know if they sat with their own reflections long enough to realize the harm they caused. But that's no longer my responsibility. I've let go of trying to fix what they broke. I've stopped reaching for apologies that were never coming. I no longer define myself by the absence of their love, but by the abundance of my own. Sometimes I think about that note I left on the kitchen counter the day I locked the house for the last time. Surprise, a burden did this. Back then, it felt like defiance, a reclaiming of power. But now I see it differently. The real burden wasn't me. It was the weight of needing to be chosen by people who only knew how to take. Letting go of that need was the most liberating thing I've ever done. It allowed me to choose myself, to choose peace, to build a life not rooted in desperation for approval, but in the quiet certainty that I am enough. Today, my life is not perfect, but it is mine. Every step I take, every decision I make, comes from a place of self-trust I never thought I'd earn. I live without tiptoeing. I speak without shrinking. I love without performing. I dream without asking permission. This is the life I built from the ashes of betrayal. This is what it means to be free. Freedom, I've learned, is not a destination. It's a daily decision. It doesn't always arrive like a thunderclap. More often, it's a whisper, soft and steady, reminding you that you no longer live according to someone else's rules. That realization, though profound, isn't always easy. There are still days I question myself, not about the decision I made to sever ties or sell the house, but about the woman I am still becoming. Grief doesn't vanish with clarity. It just becomes quieter. It walks beside you rather than chasing you down. Sometimes, it even wears the face of old longing, those tender if fleeting moments when I wonder what it might have felt like to be loved unconditionally by the people who raised me. That kind of ache never really dissolves. It folds itself into your ribcage, familiar as breath. But it doesn't rule me anymore. What surprises me most isn't how I've changed, but how I've begun to embrace who I was all along. For years, I thought I needed to become someone else to be worthy. Quieter, more grateful, less ambitious, more accommodating. I twisted myself into whatever shape I thought would win affection, validation, mercy. But none of it worked because the target was always moving. Now, when I look back at the girl I was, the one who stayed up late writing scholarship essays, who worked 3 jobs, who took out loans no one helped her repay, who still sent money home just to be seen, I don't see weakness. I see extraordinary strength. I see loyalty born from hope. I see a heart that kept showing up, even when it was bruised. That girl didn't fail. She grew. She endured. She carried the weight no child should carry, and she set the foundation for the woman I am today. Reclaiming my life also meant reclaiming my definition of family. I used to think family was about blood, history, tradition, those things we're told matter most. But when I needed understanding, protection, acceptance, it didn't come from blood. It came from friends who showed up without being asked. From colleagues who became confidants, from women in my workshop circle who brought casseroles when I was sick, sent voice notes when I doubted myself, cheered me on when I hesitated to call myself a leader. I no longer say, I'm all alone. I say, I chose my people. And those people, they see me. Not for what I give, but for who I am. Even now, years later, I still find myself unpacking the lessons hidden inside that experience with my parents. Not just the betrayal, but the quieter, more insidious ways that control disguised itself as care. I've come to understand that financial abuse isn't just about stealing money, it's about stealing agency. It's in the subtle expectation that you owe your success to them. It's in the guilt they use to make your independence feel like abandonment. It's in the shame they plant when you finally say no. That awareness became the blueprint for the work I now do more intentionally. The Foundations program has expanded into partnerships with nonprofits, banks, and counseling centers. We offer financial literacy resources tailored for women leaving abusive relationships. We train real estate agents on how to spot signs of coercion. We've created a downloadable toolkit that's been accessed by over moi people. And each time someone emails to say, I finally see what was happening to me, I feel that small flame of purpose reignite. There is something sacred about turning pain into service, about alchemizing what nearly broke you into something that holds others together. My grandmother, I think, knew this. Maybe that's why she left me the house. Not just because she loved me, but because she saw what I couldn't yet see. That I would need something solid when the rest crumbled. That one act of faith became the starting point of everything. I no longer mourn the house itself. I carry its spirit inside me, the lessons learned, the boundaries drawn, the love that was given without strings attached. And sometimes, when I sit in my own kitchen, sipping coffee while Clover naps by the window, I picture her smile. I imagine her nodding softly, as if to say, "You did it." There's a quiet rhythm to my days now. Work, walks, writing, community. I still light a candle every Sunday evening, not for any particular reason, just a ritual of stillness. A way to remind myself that this life is mine, that peace, once elusive, now lives here with me. I no longer ask, "Am I enough?" The question doesn't hold power anymore. I know I am, not because I proved it to anyone, but because I stopped needing to. My worth no longer depends on someone else's recognition. It lives in my choices, my boundaries, my healing. I've started journaling again, not to analyze every wound, but to celebrate small joys. A good meal, a new book, a walk that turned into a dance with rain. For so long, I thought survival had to be loud, rising from ashes, roaring into the world with declarations of strength. But healing has taught me that some of the bravest acts are quiet. Saying no without explanation, walking away without guilt, choosing solitude without shame. These are revolutions in their own right. Occasionally, I still hear secondhand updates about my parents, from distant cousins, mutual acquaintances, people who mean well. I don't ask for the information, but I don't resist it either. I receive it like mail that isn't addressed to me. Read, acknowledged, then discarded. They are still who they are. Maybe they've changed. Maybe they haven't. I don't wish them harm. I don't wish them back. I wish them accountability. I wish them the grace of their own healing, if they ever choose to seek it. But their journey is no longer tied to mine. If you had told me years ago that this would be my life, not glamorous but grounded, I wouldn't have believed you. I didn't think peace could be this full. I didn't think joy could feel this soft. I thought love had to be earned and safety had to be borrowed. But now I know. Some of the greatest love you will ever feel is the love you build within yourself, brick by brick, when the world tells you you're not enough. And some of the greatest safety you will ever find is in your own home, your own breath, your own name spoken with kindness. So if you're standing at the edge of a decision that terrifies you, if you're questioning whether you deserve more, whether you'll survive the silence that comes after walking away, I want you to know you will, you can, you must. Not because you owe anyone a happy ending, but because your story matters enough to write your own. This is mine, and I wouldn't change a word.